to like travel around a bunch of projects and meet different people. Very, very lucky. And as Fraser said, like you expect to go there, you expect to learn a lot, see a lot, interesting stuff, be really inspired, impressed. What I wasn't expecting was to come away with it changing what I believe about what God wants from us and what church is for. And it would really surprise me. So hopefully that'll come across, and I'll try and like convey what I mean by that as we go through. But I thought I'd start with the story of this guy. So we were basically traveling around meeting different people in different churches, and they were telling us their stories. That was the basic format of the week. So just hearing stories from all these people who were living really in quite poor conditions, like very poor communities. So this is Francois and his wife Celine. They started by telling us about their background. In fact, I want to kind of show you a little bit, let me show you some pictures of where Francois and Celine lived. That, behind them, that's their church. This is the kind of setting, that's like a typical house in the area. That's the view from around the back of the church. Like, it is the most beautiful part of the world you've ever been to. It's like, I say it's like the Yorkshire Dales, but tropical. Like, it really was like that. It was absolutely amazing. There's just little street scenes, but you can get a picture of what it's like. Yeah, so this is the kind of community. So you, like in the city, this is just on the outskirts of the city really. So in the city you've got like tarmac roads and everything you expect. As you go a bit further out into the communities on the edge, the tarmac ends, and you've got these kind of tracks and stuff. Let's try from here. It's a photo, surely photo will work. So that's the church again, so that's the community then. That's the inside of the church. They're very proud of their church building. It's like a new building, and they say it's one of the best churches in the area. And so Francois and Celine, his backstory, he said he started by saying, we are no longer living where we were living, and he wasn't talking about location. He was talking about like spiritually, like where they were living, and he described the fact that they'd been living in darkness. And this is how most people's stories started. They didn't necessarily use those words, but everybody started by saying, we were living without hope, or I was lonely, I was isolated. So his was, I was living in darkness. He was involved in drugs, alcohol, they had nowhere to live as a family. Their relationship was completely broken, they were always in conflict. And if you think back to that picture of the house, like you don't have double glazing, it's like if you're arguing all the time, everyone in the community knows it. And so they were always moving around because the neighbours just couldn't stand the racket all the time. They were really the poorest of the poor. Like everyone in the community is poor, but they were really rock bottom. They had no plan for their life, no future, and no aims in life. And this is just like what he's relating to. This is like the situation I was in. And then what changed in his life was the Bible. And this was the verse that he said really spoke of what happened to him. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises on you. And that's what it felt like to him when he kind of connected with God. And the words he used, he said, I realised love and compassion. And he realised that people love and care about him. Whereas before he was alone, now they're part of a community, and his family is a peaceful family, and he said everyone in the community can testify to that, because people know they're not. So they're a peaceful family. Before, he said, my neighbours had no security because of me. So you imagine he's on drugs and alcohol, it's probably one of the reasons why they were always having to be moved around, because their neighbours couldn't stand them. But now they are trusted. He is I believe, a deacon in the church, like a community leader. They sit down as a family and they plan their future together. They've been baptized, they pray, they sing, they worship, they share the gospel. They grow crops that they sell, which allows them to pay school fees. Previously their children weren't in school. And he said again, I am no longer living where I was living. And he's trying to describe this transformation that's happened in his life. And his wife closed it by saying, we had no hope for the future, but now we are confident. And there's like one of the things that struck me when I listened to these stories is that bit in the Bible about faith, hope, and love, and that those three things were the things missing from their lives, and they've now got all three. And it's not just that somebody's given them a handout. Nobody gave them any money, but they're now they're now confident and happy, and they're hopeful and got purpose to their lives. So what was incredible was they're not just hearing the stories of like individuals' lives transformed, but everywhere we went, we were seeing the whole communities being transformed and hearing the stories of how the whole community was changing. And we travelled all over Rwanda, hearing people's stories like this, and they were all like this, and it was phenomenal. So this is the result of Faith Open Love. So this is the result of something that Tear Fund, this charity, do. They are a Christian charity. Their mission is to work with the church to end extreme poverty. And they have this program they call Transforming Communities. And this I think this phrase touches the heart of what changed in my mind about what the church is for. Is the church about, we want more people in our church, or is the mission of the church to transform the community that we're in? Because that's what those churches in Rwanda are doing, and that's what was so inspiring. And so this program is about teaching churches to think differently about their faith and their purpose, and how they should respond to the communities they're in. They're not just doing it in Rwanda, they're now doing this in 30,000 churches across the world, and they've set themselves a goal to reach 250,000 churches by 2030. Like, they're really going for it. Because they've been doing it, it started like 30 years ago, somewhere in East Africa, like a local program, and it's so successful, it's just been growing and growing, and now they've rebuilt the whole charity now around this program. Like, this is the thing that is really working, and this is what we should be doing. So why is it so effective? And they tell me the reason it's so effective is because of the way they think about poverty. And they say this, that poverty is not caused by a lack of money. And that's not to say that lack of money isn't a big problem, but they're saying it's not the root cause of the problem, it's just a symptom. And what most people are doing is treating the symptom, not the root cause. And it sounds crazy, but it'll become clear. And then the more I started hearing these stories, the more it struck me that if you look past the economic poverty that people have got over there, the more you see parallels with what's happening here in our society and the other types of poverty. So loneliness, despair, lack of purpose, like low self-esteem, sense of powerlessness and helplessness to have any like control of your destiny. And so I was just, the whole time I was there, I was thinking, well, surely what they're doing here makes sense in the UK as well, even though we don't necessarily have that kind of economic poverty. So they say that poverty is, what is poverty? They say poverty is caused by a brokenness within and between people and the world around them. So they say these are the causes of poverty, and it's broken relationships with yourself. So relationship with yourself, this is about your sense of self-worth and purpose, and like, so they're addressing this by teaching people about their value in the sight of God, that God created them, God values them, God created them for a purpose, and they have God-given resourcefulness, gifts and abilities that they can have some control over their destiny. Their relationship with others is about building that ability to love your neighbour. And you have those preconceptions about what it's like you think in the poor world, right, people are really struggling, but at least they still have community, because we don't have community, but our community's all died off because we're all got too much money, we've got our nice houses and our central heating and our closed doors. At least they have community, and it's so untrue. Every story started with how lonely and isolated people were. And you've got to remember, Rwanda, 30 years ago, it was a genocide. Like, millions of people were massacred with machetes at the hands of their neighbours. So relationships with others, it's about rebuilding ability to trust each other, live in community. And we know what it's like. You don't get on with the people in the church at half the time, and it's hard. But like teaching people to do that and building that on biblical principles. Relationship with the environment can be as simple as just looking after the space you live in. It could be maintaining the buildings, it could be learning how to grow crops or protect the climate, but it's basically being a good steward of the resources God's given you. And if you don't do that, we all know what we're like, the stuff, climate change and how that's affecting the third world. And then relationship with God, because where does self-worth come from if it's not understanding how you sit in relation to God? And how do you build those and maintain those challenging relationships when you're living in community with that, if you don't understand how God expects you to interact with people and see each other? So yeah, they say that this is the cause of poverty, and poverty is more than just money, it's about relationships. Poverty of relationships is really a problem that you need to solve, and you can't end economic poverty without addressing these things. And what was fascinating was hearing every single person we talked to, this message we got through so clearly to everyone in every project, in every church, that they're working on 3 pillars in their lives, and it's the spiritual, social, and economic. And this is different to us because I think I think in the Western world, and I heard this from the church leaders out there as well, before the church was just about the spiritual, and I think we're probably better than they were there, that we think about social and economic, we do the food bank stuff, that's economic. But somehow they're a bit more separate than they should be. And I think there's something about when we do social and economic, we're doing it as a kind of charity thing maybe, like we want to help people, we're giving, but what we're not doing is we're helping people to rebuild their own capacity to do these things. And that's because it's hard, it's hard to see how could we do that. So we do the thing we can do, which is still valuable, but that was what was really fascinating about this project, is that they are teaching people these 3 things, that you need these 3 things to be whole. And they're saying that these 3 things together are kingdom things. And we met the Bishop of Kigali, the capital city of Rwanda, and we met the head of the theological college in Rwanda, and they were basically telling us that this approach that Tear Thunder brought to Rwanda, they are now embedding it in all their teaching to all the churches in Rwanda and expecting every church to do it, because to them it makes sense, because it's thinking holistically about somebody. It's about saying, we can't knock on somebody's door and offer to pray for them and teach them about Jesus if they haven't got food to eat. You've got to meet their economic needs as well. And it's no point just giving them food to eat if that means they need you to come next week and give them more food to eat. It's like, how are you going to help them get beyond that? And when God wants to see us whole, he doesn't just want to see us spiritually whole. He wants to see our relationships restored with the people around us, and he wants to see us lifted out of economic poverty as well. So I thought that was fascinating. Fraser gave me 20 minutes, and I prepped this in a hurry, so I have no idea how long I'm actually going to talk for, if that's okay. Hopefully it's interesting.
It's good.
Yeah. So the message I heard from literally everyone I spoke to in Rwanda, from people like Francois, members of churches, to ministers, bishops, the head of the theological college, they all said the same thing, that they're seeing healed lives leading to transformed communities, and that it only works when you address these things together. I'm going to tell you some more people's stories in a minute and tell you a little bit about how their projects work, which don't really translate to our situation. It doesn't give us any answers of how to do it. I think that's for us to work out. So they talked a lot about how the Western church teaching tells us these things are separate, but as Africans with African tradition, they have a more holistic view of the world, and your relationship with nature and the environment. They've got this African tradition they draw on as well. And it's fascinating when you have this in mind and you start reading the Bible again, you just see it all through the Bible. It's like, how did I not really see this before? Whether it's like the woman at the well, where Jesus talks about the bread of living life, but it's like he meets people's physical needs as well with the feeding of the 5,000, and he meets their spiritual needs, and everything he does, it's like he treats it all as interconnected. It's all one thing. And so they're saying that basically we're often the Western church is taught to alleviate symptoms rather than address the root causes, and they're trying to change that. They told me some stories of projects they've done which only address 1 or 2 of these things, that focus on one part of it, and they talked about how it just wasn't as effective, and it never led to transform communities, and that's the difference they're seeing. They help people, people's lives would be changed, but not necessarily permanently, and it didn't lead to this big transformed communities. So it's like in the UK, needs will be different. So often there isn't that economic need, but those other types of poverty, spiritual and social, it feels like they're just endemic here, aren't they? Like they're everywhere. And there is obviously some economic poverty as well. So maybe it'll be different how we would need to respond. But I guess the question is, when we're looking at people we're serving, like, what do we say when we want to bring people into church? And like maybe the thinking should be, what kind of poverty exists in our community, and how can we, what do we need to do to address it? So Claudine, her story, she's married with 5 kids, and she told us, I want to share with you what God has done. And she came to Rwanda 3 years ago, fleeing from conflict in Congo, neighbouring country. She said, I was a lonely and hopeless woman. I had to integrate into the community, so I came to the church. And she said the church is not just focused on my spiritual needs, it's focused on social, spiritual and economic. They've taught me how to grow crops. They've taught me which crops sell well on the local market, so I know which ones to grow. And so I've been able to make a living. I've been able to pay for health insurance for my family and school fees for my children. And she said that she's happy with what she's achieved. And these words struck me. She said, I am no longer lonely and hopeless. I am happy, I am confident. She said they meet, pray and study the Bible together, which brings them out of fear. And she gave this verse from Job, which said that each one tended to give us a verse that really spoke to them and their story. I know you can do all things, no purpose of yours can be thwarted. And she said, I believe God can do more than I think. So, yeah. Let's go on to somebody called Jane. No, let's get out of that. Here we go. This lady's called Jane. She's married with 6 children. She said she's thankful to the church. The church did an outreach crusade and met Jane. She was addicted to drugs and alcohol. She said she was lonely and hopeless. She didn't know she could look after her kids. She was touched when the preacher preached. She accepted Jesus and joined one of these groups. I'll tell you about the groups in a minute, the actual thing they do that they join these people into. She got baptized, she's now an active member. She said, I was not respected in the community, but now I'm trusted. I was neglected by the community. I didn't have anywhere to live with my kids. When people saw the change in me, the local leaders of the community supported her to buy a house. And what changed her was the word of God. Without prayer, nothing could have been achieved. Sorry, I'm jumping about. Now she can pay for, and they've supported her economically as well, and I will tell you in a moment how they do that. Now she can pay for health insurance. She's a happy woman, continuing her transformation. She is trusted. A community leader selected her to be in charge of this thing that happens every other Saturday, where the whole community's out cleaning the streets and repairing roads, and she's now leading that, having moved from being rejected by the community because she was a drug addict, and she gets paid for that, and all because the church was mobilised to reach out to the community. This lady, Tarcisia, said, I am a transformed woman. She was hopeless and lonely, same words again. How many people do you think in our community wouldn't use those words, because nobody says that, but that's probably how they're feeling. She said, we are poor people, but we are smart people, and now we are confident to speak in public, all as a result of our Bible studies. She quoted Psalm 91, whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. Now she is involved in mobilising other community members to join. She's actually from a different church in the parish. Her church has grown from 120 to 200 members in 3 years. Every church we spoke to had doubled in size in the 3 years that they've been doing this project. Yeah. She was living in absolute poverty, but now she has her own small business and a thriving income. One of the really interesting things about all this is nobody has given any of these people any money. So they have just been taught from the Bible and taught practical steps of how they can improve their lives. And so I'll explain how the system works. So they run these things called self-help groups, and this is the same across all these 37,000 churches. So churches taught how to implement this approach, but they set up a self-help group and they invite people to join it. And they often start with church members before they start expanding it to people outside the church. And to join the self-help group, people have to contribute to a kitty, and they have to contribute 6p a week, which doesn't sound like very much, but these are people who are living on about not much more than probably living on about 30p a week. So they've got very, very little money, often struggling to feed their kids, but they're not allowed to join the group unless they are willing to contribute from what the little they've got. And this is part of a philosophy around, this is partly how you're building self-worth, is by what they achieve. You're teaching them how to achieve things using the resources that God has given them. So they're putting money into this kitty, they're attending this group, and they're doing Bible study and prayer and being taught practical advice. And then after a while, they're able to ask for a loan from the group. So they have to submit a simple business plan, which is basically saying, here's what I want to borrow money for, and here's how and when I'll pay it back. And a really common starting point is to buy a chicken. So we commonly hear this story of like, buy a chicken, I use and I heard this so many times, I bought a chicken with the loan from the group, I used the eggs to feed my kids, which fixed their malnutrition, I sold the surplus eggs on the market, which allowed me to repay the loan, and then once I repaid it, I took a bigger loan, and then I bought a pig, or I did this, and they gradually go from there. This lady, so their group was given some money by Tier Fund, but again, it's a loan, and they call it a revolving loan because the group has to pay it back, because then Tier Fund can give it to another group. So the group was loaned £360 by Tier Fund, and she borrowed £48 of it, and she bought a pig with that. And she used £30 to buy a pig, and then some to buy stuff to grow crops with. And she started selling fruit and veg at the local market, used the profit to repay her loan. The pig had 10 piglets. She got £9 each for those. She then sold the pig for £60 and upgraded to a cow, which cost her £120. And one of the reasons she got a cow, and this is a common progression, is because Tier Fund had been teaching them about modern agriculture using organic compost to improve their crop yields. So a lot of them would say, I was using traditional farm techniques before, but now I've been taught modern farming. So they buy a cow so they can get organic manure for organic compost. And that really helps them with their yields, so they can sell more and be more productive. The cow had a calf, so now she has 2 cows. She's repaid the loans with that. She's been able to then buy some land so she can grow more crops. She gets milk from the cows, which she can sell at market and also feed to her family. And what's really interesting is so that's like the economic piece, right, for them, which it's like hard to imagine how that would apply to us. But the economic piece on its own doesn't work. I met a lady at the hotel I was staying at who worked for a different charity, it's not a Christian charity, and she was very, she didn't realise what we were doing there, I think, and she was telling us all about what their charity does, and it was almost identical, except it didn't have the Bible element. So they were doing the same, setting up a small group, teaching them how to borrow and invest in their futures sensibly and sustainably, and make plans for their lives, and do income generation, farming techniques, all the rest of it, and work together as a group. But it didn't have the biblical underpinning. And she said, the problem is, do you find it? We told her we do a very similar thing. She said, well, do you find the problem where it often doesn't work, and it's because the lack of trust in the group, because you're contributing to this communal kitty, you're borrowing, you have to repay, and we were sat there thinking, well, of course it doesn't work. You're missing the spiritual pillar. I've literally had people telling me all week, you need 3 pillars. If you miss this pillar, you don't have the biblical basis for how you should be thinking about yourself and interacting with the people around you. And that was fascinating. So people in these groups are being taught, they go through this Bible program where they're being taught starting with self-worth and all these other steps. They're being taught financial literacy, responsible borrowing investing, modern agriculture techniques. They're being taught how to go out and map the needs of their community and make a plan together for community transformation. So it's like they're going out and taking the poorest people in their community and saying, you guys now need to work together and help other people, which I think is fascinating, which touches on some of the stuff like you were saying about, can these people not help us lead? Yeah. But they're doing it with this program of teaching them about how it should be done and what's important. They're teaching them conflict resolution, how to work as a team, teaching about God. Yeah, so I guess, my takeaway, as I said, is like, what is the purpose of the church? And it changed how I think about the church. And like, I guess I've always thought of these things as being separate, like our, the real mission of the church is to bring people in to knowing God, and the other stuff we do is worthwhile but separate. I guess it's been my way I've internalized it. And I came away really challenged with, isn't the mission of the church to transform our community? Isn't it to bring the kingdom of God in this area, not just in this building? And I think one of the reasons it really struck me was because I just never imagined how that was even possible. But then seeing people here do that with literally no resources and achieve it, I thought was fascinating. The Bishop of Kigali said that the ministers who are successful with this community transformation approach are those who see it as integral to the mission of the church, not separate from the theology and mission of the church. One of the ministers said, most churches only focus on the spiritual side, but people need to be trained in things like conflict resolution, income generation, like they have, that if you're not meeting those other needs and you're only meeting one part of it, it needs to be more holistic. So there's a challenge. Like, I don't know if this stuff is right, I'm just telling you what struck me when I was out there. Pastor Jane, running one of the churches that have been doing it for a bit longer, she said, we used to stand only on one pillar, the spiritual pillar. We started with transforming individuals, then the church, then the community, and that seemed to be the way it worked. Often you see the transformation in individual lives first, and then it spreads outwards. It took them a year as a church to just come up with a plan, even to get started. And it very much starts small with like one or two groups, and you're starting by addressing self-esteem and teaching the church to look outwards, which I guess is what Fraser's trying to do with us, and understand the needs of the community. Then visiting people in need, and tending to their needs, like we do with food bank and stuff, but then going beyond that and encouraging them to join these self-help groups and saying, look, you can take control of your situation and we can equip you with tools to do that. This guy Martin, so his role is what's called a facilitator, so he's been trained at church to support and run these self-help groups to make sure they're running well, so how they're supposed to work. He said, before we had few church members who were not looking beyond the church to the community, only focused on themselves. In the last 3 years, we've baptized 450 people. We've brought 32 people out of drug and alcohol addiction. Some of them are now church leaders and deacons. We've seen children going back into school, including street kids. We built 6 houses for vulnerable people. We've constructed a road to improve access to jobs and the market. We have families who were living in conflict who now live in harmony. We're 30 years on from the genocide, and I think something like 100 people were killed at this particular church. And he said, we've got genocide perpetrators now being released from prison, and the church has linking the perpetrators to survivors and facilitating reconciliation so they can be integrated back into society, mobilising them to ask for forgiveness. They've mapped the needs of their local community and responded to issues identified. And he quoted as a verse from Kings 2, which says, this town is well situated, but the water is bad and the land is unproductive. Then he went out to the spring and threw salt into it. And it's a verse that basically speaks about a town that's in the right place, but is unproductive, and then salt was thrown into the well, and suddenly the land becomes productive. And it's like a metaphor for, for him it was a metaphor for his church in that town. Like, we were there, but we weren't achieving what God wanted, and then something changed. This church now has 36 self-help groups with 733 members in it. About 2/3 of them are from the church, and the rest are from the community. I think that's nearly it. Yeah, so then the question, so what is poverty in our community? And maybe not thinking about this as poverty out there as something that needs to be fixed in itself, but what is the brokenness in relationships that underlies it, and how can we help bring that healing? And I really don't know what the answer is to that. Just giving you questions and answers. Back to Claudine, I guess. I just wanted to kind of leave on this, just remind you of what she said, which was, if this works. She may not come up, but yeah. She said, I am lonely. I am no longer lonely and hopeless. I am happy and I am confident. And that's what somebody looks like when the kingdom is brought to them, I guess.